right, so here we are, Dawn and me having a conversation.
Yeah.
So, Dawn, how did we get here? From my recollection, we I saw your comments in I think it was a PVK live stream,
Yeah.
and you seem like an interesting person and seemed like we had somewhat similar backgrounds, and I'm a big fan of always bringing people in as much as we can into this little corner.
Yeah.
And so, from your vantage point, how did we get here?
Yeah. It's a good question. I was trying to remember back, when I started listening to Paul,
Mm-hmm.
how I even stumbled into this little corner. And I can't remember exactly when it happened, but I think it's been like a slow burning thing, for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
Um, I've listened to a lot, and sometimes I comment. Mostly, I've just been, hanging out, listening.
Yeah.
Um, but I probably found PVK first. Maybe it could have been Jonathan Peugeot.
Okay.
I followed Rod Dreher for a long time. If you're familiar with Rod,
Yep.
and I think he turned me on to Jonathan Peugeot. And somewhere in the midst of all of that, I connected to PVK and started, following his live streams, and realized that I was no longer by myself on the island of misfit toys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I've seen you frequently in the comments and more on Grail Country as I started seeing where all the little tentacles led. And
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah.
So, so you, so I mean, what was the bridge between Rod Dreher, Peugeot, PVK, and then all of a sudden, yeah, the way you describe it is you weren't alone in the island of misfit toys. At
Yeah.
some point, you discovered. When would you say you discovered TLC and that there was some kind of weird, well, not weird, but novel or uh, I don't even know what the word is, a group of people that were part of this online community? When did that ball drop?
That's a great question. Probably within the last year.
Okay.
Um, my short-term memory is just not cooperating with me. I don't
Yeah.
remember when all of that started.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, but it was really good to find it. You know?
Nice. So what was you tell me a little bit about yourself, your
Yeah,
story. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
PVK
yeah,
always says tell me about the house you grew up in, but
yeah.
what is your backstory that gets you to the place where this is interesting enough for you to engage to the level that you have to where we're having this conversation?
Sure. It's a long story.
Yeah,
Um,
perfect.
Gosh, where do I start? So my mom and dad got married 6 weeks after they met. My
Okay.
dad was in the military. He's from New England, and he was stationed down on the Gulf Coast in Mississippi, and met my mother, and they got married 6 weeks later.
Mm-hmm.
And I came along a couple of years after that, and I was a really precocious child. Learned how to read very, very early. Uh, some people told my mom and my dad they should put me in a special school. And my mom and dad were like, no, 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 no. We want her to have a normal life. Unfortunately, see, even going back all the way to then, we should have realized that a normal life, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Um, so, dad was in the military. We moved around a bit. And when I was in Denver, we lived in Denver for a couple of years, and I was about, gosh, 3 or 4 years old. I think I was 4. And there were some kids in my neighborhood who used to ride this bus to a church in town. And I decided I wanted to go to church. And so I got ready this one Sunday, and I go down to the bus stop, And this, now, mind you, this is like 1970 when this
Mm.
happens, okay? This man gets off the bus in a three-piece suit, and I saw him, and I turned around and ran home. But I ended up going to church. And so when my dad got transferred to Kansas City, which is where I spent most of my life,
Mm-hmm.
they decided that we needed to get involved in a church. And so we found one and absolutely fell in love with it. And within a couple of years, we moved to a suburb in Kansas City with about 40 to 50 other families and started a community.
Yeah, I heard you make some comment about how you, because I was talking about, like, I don't know, my somewhat
That was
fake dream of living in a commune, and you said,
right.
I've been there. It's
Yeah,
great.
I really have done this. Um, Now, our commune was a little different. Everybody had their own house. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like, although we did have people who lived with other people. That happened
Mm-hmm.
frequently, especially, for people who were having financial problems or trying to
Sure.
figure out, where to go next. That was a tradition that started in my life pretty early, and that hasn't changed for me over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, so I was probably 9 by the time this happened. But we had this community of people. We all went to the same church. The postman dubbed us Baptist Hill because the name of our church, it was a Baptist church when we joined it. There was a church split, and we ended up doing house church
Mm-hmm.
for decades, actually.
Oh,
Most
wow.
of most of my experience in the church has been in very informal, um, non-institutional
Yeah.
settings, mostly in house church and that sort of thing. Um, so I was, I guess, I was basically a very non-denominational believer,
Yeah.
but a believer very early in my life. Um, when I was a teenager, my only brother developed leukemia, and he had a variety of leukemia that at that time was extremely rare in children. So he was 3 years younger than I am. So he was about 12 when he was diagnosed. And the only potential cure for him was a bone marrow transplant or a stem cell transplant.
Okay.
Okay, this was back in 1982. And at that time, outside of a familial match, it was very, very difficult to find a donor for
Right. Yeah.
somebody who needed a transplant.
Yeah.
So we started rallying people in Kansas City. My family did. And we never did find a match for my brother, and he died in 1985. Um, my parents actually started one of the first marrow donor registries in the country as a result of trying to find a donor for my brother.
Yeah.
I ended up working there. Um, so that became a pretty seminal, formative experience for me on multiple fronts.
Yeah.
One was, of course, vocationally, the things that I would go on to do in my life, but also as it comes to the faith. My brother died in 1985, and
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember a whole lot about the 80s. I don't know how old you are. Um, it was a really happy time for a lot of people, but something that we really didn't talk about in the church at all was suffering.
Mm.
And so I the way that I experienced that was really traumatic. Lots of people who were supposed to be my friends kind of scattered. People didn't know what to do with,
Mm-hmm.
knowing somebody who was terminally ill or connected to somebody who was terminally ill. Um, and it really shook my faith, or at least it shook what I thought was my faith, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
Yeah. And you
A
were
very
still in house churches at this time.
Yeah, well, I was in college. It was my freshman year of college when my brother died, and
Okay.
so at that point, I wasn't in I wasn't in our community house church. And the
Mm.
community I grew up in was wonderful. They were there, they were supportive, and it was really good. But even for some of them, I think theologically, the idea that a kid could, get a disease like that, and especially because there were people all over the world praying for him
Mm.
and not seeing their prayers answered the way they thought they should be. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, that was really hard and really isolating. Um, so I was 19 and going through a midlife crisis, basically like,
Wow.
what is this? What's happening here? How come prayers for healing didn't work? And what does it mean if you're suffering? And it was about that point when I was 19 that I very slowly but surely just like I don't want to call it deconstructing because everybody calls it deconstructing, and I don't really think that's what I was doing.
Okay.
But I recognized that something in my theology was messed up because I
Mm.
didn't have any way to account for what had happened.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I slowly started reading the church fathers, trying to
Mm.
go back to what was the early church? What was the church like when Jesus first left the earth? How did the church develop? And I've basically spent my life since then kind of reading and thinking and, you know, learning again how
Uh-huh.
to follow Jesus. Um,
What
and
made you go to, like, the church fathers?
I think it was the sense that I knew that some of what I had learned and I knew some of what I believed was good and true. But
Mhm.
I recognized that something wasn't right
Yeah.
because we had no answer for why people suffer.
Yeah.
And I knew that I needed to understand what that was about. And I
Mhm.
needed to find, I just needed answers, you know?
Yeah.
Of course, the older I get, the more I realize that some of the answers we want, we're just not going to get in this lifetime. We're
Mm.
just
Yeah.
not. And that's okay. Um, but it took me a while to get there, you know?
Yeah. So within your community, though, these were I mean, part of it was you were driven to look for this stuff because everybody else around you just didn't know how to respond to it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I mentioned I was a freshman in college. I was
Mhm.
going to a small Baptist university, um, mostly because it was close to home and I had a lot of friends who were going there. And again, the notion that somebody could be that deathly ill, it had to be somebody's sin. There had to be
Mm.
some reason for it, right?
Yeah.
Um, but there was no good reason for that. It
Yeah.
just is. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, but I needed a way to make sense of it. And so I think that's largely what got me started down that road, trying to make sense of the Odyssey, right? It's the great question, I think, of the human race.
Yeah.
Where is God when people suffer?
Yeah.
Um, and that journey took me through a really circuitous route. I ended up, well, I left college, I got married. That was a mistake.
Okay.
I ended up divorced about 6 years later. And then, during that time, I was working for the registry that my parents started. We ended up joining
Mhm.
up with a national organization, the National Marrow Donor Program. I think they may have changed their name since then. They still exist. And in fact, their headquarters used to be in Minneapolis.
Really?
Yeah. In fact,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I did that for a number of years. And then as I started to kind of recover from the grief and, mistakes I'd made in my life and all of that, I went back to school and I ended up getting my master's in English
Okay.
and ended up teaching at the collegiate level. Um, Shortly after I went to England in 1998 for the centenary celebration of C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
I met a lot of really cool people there.
Uh-huh.
I got to hear Callistos Ware give a homily, which was really my first introduction to orthodoxy,
Okay.
which is something I'm just now really exploring. I'm actually in the middle of taking a catechumens class, except I'm not technically a catechumen yet. I'm just sort of sitting in on it,
Yeah.
feeling it out.
Inquirer, perhaps.
Yeah. Something like that anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, and being at that conference, I was just like, oh, I love this. It was, again, one of those experiences where it's like, hey, I'm not on the island of misfit toys. This is
Yeah.
great, right? It's like,
Yeah.
um, you know, Jesus, Lewis, literature, philosophy. It was like, okay, I can hang with these people.
Yeah.
And so I came back home and went back to school and got my master's. Um, I had intended to go on for a PhD. I was one of those really weird academics. I actually had a dissertation that I was ready to go forward with, but the PhD thing fell through. Like most people who do that, they go and they take all their classes and then they end up being ABD, all but dissertation.
Okay.
I have the dissertation. I just don't have the classwork.
Okay.
So anyway, I taught at university and at a really good community college in the Kansas City area. And I did that until 2011 when my husband and I moved here to St. Louis, and I just didn't find another teaching position.
Okay. So you
So
must have gotten remarried at some point.
I did get remarried. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. That's somewhere in the timeline. I got remarried in 2005. And
Okay.
that was actually, I finished my master's in 2004. And so, yeah, and I inherited an amazing daughter.
Okay.
She lived with us. She actually lived with her dad from the time she was 5. So when we got married, I got a bonus daughter, which
Yeah.
was great. Yeah. But I loved teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up teaching writing more than literature, which was okay. Um, One of the things I ended up doing during that time was reviewing books for the Kansas City Star.
Okay.
So it was nice to be able to keep the literature part alive while also teaching writing.
Yeah.
But I discovered that students, even back then, were really struggling with logical processes, like really being able to think through things and
Mm.
like finding their voice because they didn't know
Mm-hmm.
how to think.
Yeah.
So I started teaching basically Socratic logic to my composition
Oh,
classes,
wow.
which was really good because I was learning it too along the way.
Yeah.
Because when I was doing my master's, philosophy departments were basically no longer teaching Socratic logic, they're teaching symbolic logic, which isn't the
Mm.
same. It's just not the same. So, yeah, did
I'm not
that.
even familiar like I've never heard of that before. What is symbolic logic compared to Socratic?
Well, okay, so the Socratic method uses a
Yeah.
combination, right, of deductive and inductive reasoning, right, to reach conclusions. While
Yeah.
symbolic logic, basically, it takes premises and it kind of transcribes them into symbols, right?
Mm.
So, like, if P, then Q kind of thing,
Hmm.
right? Um, And it works up to a point, but human beings are more complicated than that. Language is more complicated than that. And so I think the symbolic logic misses some stuff.
Huh. Yeah, because I'm interested in that because a lot of my, to whatever degree it's happened, my intellectual awakening is tied to educational things. And I got really into classical education when my oldest was getting to school age, and so I was learning about the Socratic method, but I've never heard of this symbolic thing. And I mean, with Peugeot, I mean, I'm guessing it's not related to like the symbolism of Peugeot.
Oh, no, that's good symbolism.
Yeah.
This is more, this kind of symbolism, I think it just kind of sucks the life out of all of it.
Okay.
Right? It just, it tries to turn it into a mathematical equation.
Okay.
And that's just not what it, that's just not how it works. That's not how human logic works.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, to be able to get students to think through why do certain ideas hold together, which I just think you have to do that using language and not symbols.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Not metaphorical symbols. That's a whole other thing. And I'm all about that. That stuff's great. But yeah, turning it into an algebraic equation, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was listening to something today and someone was saying, oh, it was like some Rogan episode, and they were talking about 2 + 2 = 5 and how like people using that to deny math and everything really equates down to math. I'm like, well, no, I don't really think that's the way it exactly works. But so this is your teaching, and they're trying to go into this symbolic thing, and so then what happened?
Well, when I left Kansas City, my husband got a job in St. Louis, which is where we are now.
Okay.
And so I took a semester off thinking that once we got settled, I would try to find another teaching position, and that just never materialized. And we actually kind of thought that St. Louis would not stick. We kind of thought we would be here for a short period of time and then go on somewhere else. That also never materialized. And so we kind of got stuck here.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I would move back to Kansas City if I'm in Missouri and I had to take and I had my choice. I'd go back to Kansas City.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm here in St. Louis, and I'm a huge Royals fan. And you like baseball?
I mean, I know enough about it to know who the Royals are.
Okay, right on. Anyway, so yeah, they're in a pennant. Well, they're not in the pennant hunt because there's no way they can win the pennant, but trying to make the playoffs. Anyway, yeah, I would go back to Kansas City in a heartbeat. But since I couldn't teach anymore, I started turning back really to not just my spiritual reading, which I had been doing all along, but I also started really studying the Bible deeply. And so for the last, I guess, 4 to 5 years now, I've been teaching Bible studies.
Okay.
Yeah.
With whom? Churches or?
Well, we got involved in a church here.
Okay.
That's just recently. Things didn't go well at the end here recently, and so we're not involved in that church anymore. For a host of reasons. Part of it, I think, has to do with my own theological journey. Trying to figure out where I fit on the spectrum theologically, and it's not easy,
Yeah.
So anyway, I just independently teach a group of people. And it's really more that I'm leading them rather than teaching them. and actually teaching them to study for themselves.
Sure.
So, and which that seems like a really Protestant thing to do. Although I know that Catholics are starting to invest more time and energy into that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, It's not clear to me exactly where the Orthodox stand on that at this point. It seems like, what I hear changes from week to week. And I get the sense that maybe it depends on what parish you're in, what priest you're talking to,
Yeah.
how all that works. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's definitely been my experience. I mean, I don't Orthodoxy is I mean, I always say this, I have a limited experience with it, and mine is very contingent. I mean, the only church I've ever gone to is the church that I attend in Minneapolis, and
Okay.
um, I mean, it's the only church that I've attended regularly, and I think a lot of it depends upon the priest, and because there's no larger magisterial thing, I think a lot of it depends upon the culture of the church, the tradition of the Orthodox church that you're in, and um, I, I don't. There's no that I know of. There's no Bible study in my church, but I don't think there would be any. I'm I'm almost certain you could just be like, I want to lead a Bible study, and they'd probably be pumped about it.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
don't think it would be an issue at all. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but that's my church. Like, I mean, I
Sure.
don't know if it's. I know it definitely varies from place to place. So,
Yeah.
how did you meet all these people that are in your Bible study?
A lot of them, St. Louis is really interesting in this respect. There are tons of small evangelical churches just
Hmm.
all over the place. I mean, tons of them.
Yep.
And the women in these churches have largely networked.
Mm.
So even though not everybody goes to the same church, everybody knows each other.
Yeah, through social media or what?
That's part of it, but we do a lot of things together here. Just a lot of get-togethers, going out to lunch,
Mhm.
going to conferences, retreats, that sort of thing. So I've got a group of women, some of whom are from my last church. That's where some of them come from. Some of them come from other churches around the area.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that's because the Bible studies definitely started in the former church. Um, but
So
now,
what when you're teaching it, what are you basing it on? What is your what what's the word? What is your curriculum?
what is my curriculum? I use a curriculum called Precept. I don't
Okay.
know if you've ever heard of that, but
Mhm.
it's a method of inductive. Well, they call it inductive Bible study, and
Mhm.
you slow everything way down. You go very carefully, line by line,
Mm.
verse by verse. Um, I do a lot of looking up words. I'm learning a little Hebrew and Greek in this process. So
Nice. Yeah.
Latin's kind of my language, but I'm learning some Hebrew and learning some Greek, and it's really fun.
Yeah.
So you can see how translators make the decisions they make when you do it that way. It's also the case that, every language has words that just don't translate into other languages.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of get the sense of that when you start looking up the words in their original language, when you come across some of those words that you just can't quite capture it in English, and you can see why some things are a little trickier to translate than other things.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we just,
Nice.
yeah, I mean, largely that's what we're doing, and we're, relying on the Holy Spirit to reveal what He chooses to reveal.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's really non-sectarian in that way. In the sense that it's not like, well, it's Catholic doctrine, it's Orthodox doctrine,
Mhm.
it's not that. It's what's on the page.
Mhm.
What does it mean? How does it relate to other parts of the scripture?
Mhm.
And let God do the rest. I mean, if I've learned anything here over the course of my life as a believer, the way that you encounter a section of scripture can change over time. God's truth doesn't change, but what he reveals to us, it's as we grow.
Yeah.
He reveals what he chooses to reveal in his time.
Right.
And if as long as you have an openness to that, I think it works.
Yeah. No, that's very well said. I mean, I was thinking that in terms of just literature broadly because I did a live stream this morning and I was talking about East of Eden, and somebody replied to me and made a comment about how they really love that book, and um, how they were really affected by the story, but then also just like the negative aspect of the character Kathy in the book. And I was like, oh yeah, I haven't even thought of her.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, it's been so many years since I've read the book, and I was like, I should probably reread it because my experience in I want your takes on this because my experience in reading literature, especially books that I've reread multiple times, which there's not a ton of them, but there's some. You, I mean, you get to your point of what you just said. You change the text is the same,
That's right.
but I mean, you're seeing completely new things out of it,
That's
depending
right.
on, I mean, that's one of my it's a C.S. Lewis quote, but that's one of my things I like to say all the time is like what you see and hear depends a lot upon where you're standing. It also depends upon the kind of person you are.
Yeah.
So, like who I am now versus 10 years ago and where
Yes.
I'm standing is very different.
That's right. That's
Um,
exactly right.
yeah.
Well, and Lewis himself said, the great books, you should reread them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, and you get different things out of them every time you read them.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite pieces of literature? What are some great
Oh,
books
wow. Okay.
to put you
So
on the spot?
no, I love Lewis. I
Okay.
absolutely love Lewis. I've loved him my whole life.
Okay.
So, I Till We Have Faces is, I
Yeah.
think, one of the best and most underrated books
Oh
in
man.
all, in literature.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
excellent.
it's amazing. But let's see. I I love Dickens. I
Okay.
absolutely love Dickens. Um, yeah, I
A lot of
love
contemporary,
Shakespeare.
a lot of modern people struggle with Dickens.
I get that. Um, Part of what I love about Dickens is, in some respects, he just hits you over the head with some things.
Hmm.
Like, all of his names have significant meaning, right? Like, the name of a character largely will tell you something about the character. I can give
Hmm.
you an example. If
Yeah.
Hard Times, which is one of his smaller books, which is
Okay.
about education in England, there's the name of a schoolmaster, right? In this character in his book. And the master's name is McChokumchild. McChokumchild.
That
He's
seems
not a
really on
good
the
guy.
nose.
Yeah, like literally, he's like killing the kids' like love of learning and
Hmm.
imagination and all of this other stuff. I mean, he does a lot of that with his characters. Um, and I love that. I love that about him. I also I I love Jane Austen. Interestingly, I got all the way through grad school without reading Pride and Prejudice.
Hmm.
I have since read it. Uh, it's not my favorite though out of
Hmm.
Austen's work. I'm really partial to Mansfield Park.
Okay.
Um, Part of that is probably more philosophical than anything. Um, if you familiar at all with Alasdair MacIntyre? He's a philosopher who wrote a
Yeah.
book called After Virtue.
Yeah. Vaguely. I mean, I feel
Yeah,
like the name I've run across, but I don't know enough to even
yeah,
engage.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay, that thing we were talking about where you need to reread the books. I'm due for another reading of After Virtue. It's been a
Okay.
while. Um, but he mentions Mansfield Park as an example um, of like the heroine, Fanny Price. She's truly a virtuous woman. And he points that out as an example in literature of somebody who's truly virtuous,
Hmm.
which is kind of fun. And I see that. I can totally see
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much literature. Shakespeare was probably my specialty when I was in grad school.
Okay.
I had a theory for the way that we should teach his work because at least the way it was when I was in grad school, and I don't know that it's changed. The plays tend to get broken down into their genre. Well, that's a history play. Oh no, that's
Yeah.
a comedy.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's all well and fine. But I think that doesn't do justice to what Shakespeare truly accomplished in his plays. There's a reason that he's had such longevity. There's a reason that his work can be translated into other languages, or like his plays can be put into modern settings and they still work, right?
Hmm.
Like Ian McKellen was in a version of Richard III, and I believe it was in the 90s. It also starred Annette Bening, and in that case it was set in World War II, right? And if you're familiar with the play at all, there's Richard III basically loses his ever-loving mind, and at the end of the play there's this scene, right, where he's saying, a horse, my kingdom for a horse. Everything is lost. His marbles are gone. Well, let me tell you, that scene in this Ian McKellen version of Richard III, oh my word, it works. It works. And it works because Shakespeare deals with universal truths that they're true in all times.
Yeah.
And I wanted to focus more on teaching the themes of his plays rather than getting caught up in the genre, because he did a lot of genre mixing anyway. It's where you get tragic comedy, right? You have tragedy and comedy somehow sitting in the same play, and which is cool. But instead, thinking of it like, oh, here's a play that really illustrates that pride goes before a fall.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of that in Shakespeare, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I have not. Shakespeare's one of those things I have not taken a big dive into yet. I should. I should definitely take the plunge. I mean, I've started to see a few plays here and there, but yeah, somebody like that. There's a reason they've been around so long.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would recommend, seriously, if you can get a paper copy of the plays and then find some film versions of his plays, watch the film, but keep the paper copy with you and try to go through it. Okay. You see there how the filmmaker has to change some things to make the play work, or not, as the case may be. But it also helps, I think, it helps illuminate what's on the page. I mean, they're plays, they're meant to be acted, right?
Yes.
So I've always found that to be really helpful. And I highly recommend any of the Kenneth Branagh versions of Shakespeare.
Okay.
So he's done like Henry V, Much Ado About Nothing, Hamlet. Oh, his version of Hamlet. I love it. It's amazing. Then there's some other people like the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet that starred Claire Danes and Leo DiCaprio. Oh my word. So Claire Danes.
It's one of my favorite things of all time. I've watched
Really?
it probably 10 times. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. The way Claire Danes delivers that line, wherefore art thou Romeo? Because it really means why. Like, why are you a Montague and I'm a Capulet? But she just delivers it perfectly. I love that.
Yeah, that's one of those. That's definitely in my favorite movies of all time, and it's a. I don't know. I just think that whole thing is brilliant. I mean, it's set in a modern tone, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm obsessed with it. Like everything about it, the cinematography, the like there's a song in it that I just am obsessed over. What's the heck's the name of it? It's when they meet at that party and he like goes and they're like between the bathrooms and there's a fish tank, like that whole scene.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to think of the name of the song.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on it right now.
Escapes.
Anyhow. Yeah, I love it very much. And
Mm-hmm.
it's too bad because like I try to expose my kids to stuff like that and they're just like, this is weird.
Yeah.
But
I can
anyhow,
see that being really tough these days with all the other things that kids have at their disposal. Um, and it just seems like such a world removed from where they are. What do
yeah,
they like?
yeah. Well, my kids, man, what are things that really resonate? I feel like because of the way Netflix and YouTube and Disney work, that it's just kind of like this churn of things. My girls actually really like musicals quite a bit, and so um, my wife is really into Hamilton, so they like Hamilton. They like
Oh,
Six, so they like that kind of thing.
yeah. Okay.
Dear Evan Hansen. My girls really like musicals,
Yeah.
which I really do too. And my son, what kind of stuff is he into? Movies? I don't know even. I don't know. He just watches random YouTube things. I don't even know. I feel like that's something that's a little bit lost is and maybe it's just me. I love movies. Like I'm
Yeah.
deeply connected to and moved by movies. And I feel like I could almost I often feel that way that like I could have a like my a list of my favorite movies or like a playlist of songs that I like and I'm just like that's my soul.
Yeah.
Like
Absolutely.
if you connect to those things, like there's something in that that like you see who I am, you
Right
know?
on.
And I feel like
Yeah.
my kids don't really have that kind of a thing. But I don't know. I don't know if that's just a generational thing. You know, I
Yeah.
feel that same way about books too, you know? Like I would
Mm-hmm.
say East of Eden, Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory,
Yep.
Laura, Silence, like The Road. Like those are some of my favorite books of all time.
Right
And
on.
like if you love those books, like we're simpatico.
Right
Something's
on.
cooking, you know?
Yeah, I've my husband and I have talked about that a lot because he and I are both into film and music,
Okay.
and we 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 live surrounded by people who are 10 to more years younger than we
Mhm.
are, and it's always blown our minds how little they seem to care about music in the first place, which just kills me. But
Mhm.
also, the kind of film that they watch is, I don't know, it's different. I don't know what that's about. I And maybe it's simply that my generation, I think, is the last to have come through adolescence without all of the technology at our fingertips, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I just went to my 40-year high school class reunion
Mhm.
while everybody else was at Northwest UAry. Um, and I was remembering how when I was a senior in high school, there was one classroom in our high school. It was a computer lab. And if you needed to use a computer, that's where you went because
Right.
nobody had them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was a sophomore in high school and I had my wisdom teeth cut out and I looked like a chipmunk. And my dad had like one of the very first Apple computers. And so my friends who came over to visit me ended up playing like the two the total of 2 games that were on the original Apple computer.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
were one of the only people who had one. That's because my dad's an engineer. Um, but yeah, there's so life has changed so much, so fast,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think this period we're living in is, um, I I really think it's kind of like it must have been during the Industrial Revolution, like,
Hmm.
and you can see that reflected in some of the literature coming out of Britain at the time, right? Like when all of those changes were going on. So when the printing press, like when things really started proliferating, right? When books really started getting printed, um, it had a massive effect on society. George
Yeah.
Gissing, um, who I really like, wrote a really interesting book called New Grub Street. It's a novel set in London. Um, and like there are these scenes throughout the book where these characters are coming into spaces where they should be engaging with one another, but they're
Hmm.
not. Everybody's head is in a book,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so, I mean, we have the same thing now. It's just that we're not, our heads aren't in a book anymore, which is kind
Yeah.
of unfortunate, um, only because of what it does to the brain, right?
Hmm.
Now our attention is grabbed by screens. And I don't know about you, Luke. I know that um, I can tell the effect that this stuff is having on the way my mind works.
Hmm.
It's I don't have the same attention span that I used to have, right?
Yeah.
Reading becomes more difficult. It was
Yeah.
never difficult for me, but there are times I find myself, I'm in the book and reading and going, wait a minute, what did I just read? Go back, read it
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Um, that I don't know. Maybe that has something to do with why the younger generations aren't as interested in things the way that my generation was. That could be a part of it. Um, I don't. I don't know. It's kind of sad though. At least it looks sad to me from the outside, you know?
Yeah, I'm of two minds about it. There's part of me that's sad, but I don't know how much of it is just my kind of standard generational, oh, I wish things were cool like they used to be kind of
Sure.
mindset, and lamenting the new world and the new innovations, and hearkening and dreaming and romanticizing about the good old days, because yeah, there are those patterns that go throughout history all the time. There's some new thing that happened. I mean, I'm with you. Like, I mean, I've made videos about this, calling the internet age Gutenberg 2.0. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's equivalent to the, like, whatever we're going through is, I mean, minimally equivalent to the printing press, and probably a lot more extreme.
Right.
But I don't know. And there are a lot of dangers. There's a lot of, I mean, Jonathan Haidt talks about this stuff all the time,
Yes, he
and me and,
does.
and me and my wife speak about this constantly, and we know this from our own life of with our kids, is we kept our kids pretty screen free for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and now they're teenagers. My oldest two have cell phones, and it's just like, especially when you give them one of these things,
Yep.
uh, they just our kids were such voracious readers. Like, my oldest, I mean, all my kids have read more books than maybe I'll ever read. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
truly.
Yeah.
They just used to read so much, and the second you give them one of these things, it's just like off a cliff. Like, they
Yeah.
hardly read anymore. Um, they will occasionally. I mean, we still implement things. Like, we have a policy of screen-free Sundays, I think, which is good. But then, so okay, so here's where I want to go with this, and
Okay.
and I don't know what to think of it, because um like, even my wife, my whole experience with TLC and online life, like, I probably used to be more of a Luddite, and used to be pretty cynical of um technological, the positives of technology. And
Mm-hmm.
but yet, in light of especially Northwestuary now
Mhm.
and what we've been through and my involvement in this community, I obviously think there's something of a lot of value here. And like you were talking about earlier, this collection of misfit toys and
Yep.
whatever kind of community and solidarity that we have here, um, yeah, I don't know. Despite the cynics of it, there's still some cynics. I always get comments from people like MJ that point out the deficiencies of it and think where they think it's bad. But I think there's a lot of good things. And like even Sherry did a little stream today of people's takes after the conference. There's been a number of those. And the big recurrent takeaway was just how meeting in real life only confirmed how real it was and how much everyone really loved each other. Um, and I think that's really true. Like I spend outside of my family life, church life, this is one of the things I spend probably the most time on. So like
Yep.
I see a lot of value there, and you could say like, well, I don't know, it's some kind of weird like weird uh cultish groupthink addiction. Um, I don't tend to think those things are true. I think we have enough uh alternative viewpoints and contrarian things, and we try to include those people that I don't think that's what's really going on. I see it as some kind of new um emergent reality that just wasn't possible before this technology,
Yeah.
like whether it be uh pen pals and writing and communicating across continents that way. Like that kind of thing was never possible now, and now it's just so I say all that to say I think there's something valuable here. You do. You must, because you're involved to the degree that we're talking.
Yes.
Um, what do you think about all that? What does your family think about all that?
Yeah. Hey. um, Building community in person is harder than you think. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons it's hard is because people have to actually be willing to do it. And it turns out a lot of times that they're really just not,
And
right?
when you say willing to do it, what is it?
Build
Building
community.
community, but what does
Yeah.
that entail?
Okay. So I'm going around about to answer
Yeah.
your question.
Okay.
Okay. Because it sounds like I was listening to that live stream as well
Uh-huh.
today. And it, just because, um, okay, let me try it this way. Meeting in person is probably the ideal, right? It's
Yeah.
probably best. However, we live in a world where ideal isn't always possible, right? Even um, with the best of intentions and trying our very best to make it happen, it just doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah.
Families don't always live together. My family is spread all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay, so when my husband and I moved here and we realized we were going to be living here for a while, and we chose to get involved in a church, and um, I started doing things like I host a group of women at my house once a week for dinner, and I do that trying to build relationship, because it turns out you can't build these relationships when you're at the church for the church service,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's not enough time. You can't get into the kinds of deep, meaningful conversations you need to have unless you're together. Well, guess what? Being together virtually, online, or like me lurking in the background listening at the keys going um, that's just as powerful, I think, in terms of sharing where you're at, sharing what you're thinking about, hearing what other people are doing. And in fact, in my experience here over the last couple of years, if all I did was go to my church and not go to the extra effort of having um, times of being with people, I'd have less community there than I do online.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that's different is we're mediated by these devices, right?
Yeah.
But we're talking,
Yeah.
right? There's no particular time constraint. Um, yeah, there's physical distance, but there's spiritual nearness,
Yeah.
right? Well, that's real too. It's just not complete. I was thinking as I was listening to people talk today that, and I think this is true for me too. I mean, I think we all want the complete experience.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? If, by some miracle, everybody ended up in the same city, in the same neighborhood, right? And lived near each other and could walk 2 doors down if, you needed to borrow a cup of milk or something. And you could still have these kinds of conversations. That would just be ideal. But since we don't live in Idealville,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, man, doing this online is so great. And I know my husband, he sometimes, when he gets a minute, will listen in, and he thinks the conversations are really interesting. And it's far more interesting, and not just interesting, meaningful, I think,
Mm-hmm.
than even sometimes what goes on in your own neighborhood, which is, and that's kind of what I mean. You can't force people to engage in ways they simply don't want to engage,
Yeah.
right? Even
Yeah.
even at churches. I think it sounds like a lot of the people who participate in TLC go to church, right? Or I mean, it sounds like that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm overestimating it, but and yet they keep coming back. And I think
Yeah.
that's because what's happening there is it's very real. It's just not physically, in the same space. That's all. That's the difference.
Right. And I think, I mean, part of it is just, I think this is it's so new. No one, I don't think people before would have, whether it was pen pals or talking to someone on the phone, people would just be like, and then maybe people did at the time. They just like wave that off, like that's illegitimate
Yeah.
or something. But I don't think that it is. And true, very much to your point. Like I think that very often I have more intimate conversations with people that I've met online than I have in my real life. And
Sure.
obviously estuary is a bridge to that. I
Mhm.
mean, I have a local estuary group that I'm starting to really click with and that we've been getting together for a long time. And so we do some of these things, but it's a little different. There's been, I don't know what it is. It feels like there's been all of the institutions and even churches that where people often found connection and community have uh what's the word, they've atrophied to the point where now I think people are looking for new places to find that stuff.
Absolutely. I think that's probably been true for a really long time. I mean, I worked at Starbucks back in the day, like when I was getting through grad school,
Yeah.
because you got to love the part time benefits, which were awesome.
Okay.
Uh, but we used to talk about Starbucks being a third place. Like, so take Starbucks out of it, a coffee shop, right? It's a place where people come and meet. And inevitably, I mean, it wasn't that many years ago that people didn't have smartphones. They
Hmm.
had phones, they just didn't have
Yeah.
smartphones. But you get a group of people gathered in a coffee shop and they'll start talking to each other. And
Hmm.
eventually they keep coming and they talk to each other and relationships form. And
Yeah.
so all we've done here is change the medium, right?
Hmm.
Um, every medium has embedded within it, strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not new. That's Marshall McLuhan talked about that. Neil Postman has talked about that. Um, it's really funny to go back and read Amusing Ourselves to Death now,
Mhm.
because of course, when he wrote it, it was the 80s,
Mhm.
and some of the references are dated, and yet it still resonates because you
Mhm.
can easily transpose in your mind, okay, remove, television and insert, the internet, or
Right.
um, the same principles are at work, I think.
Yeah.
uh, the same spirits, if you will, are at work.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, we have this tool, and it often gets used for ill. So the fact that we're doing something really beautiful with it, I think is amazing. I just think that's such a great, great thing. And I mean, there are days, right, when like I'm in the middle of this, trying to figure out where to go to church next, where to, what flavor of Christian am I going to be. Um, and one of the things that I think has happened, you mentioned the atrophy. I think there's
Mhm.
also, um, at least this has been my experience, um, this sense that somehow everybody has to be in lockstep on every little thing and in
Mhm.
agreement on every little thing.
Mhm.
And I find myself lately, especially, really wondering where that comes from. Because,
Yeah.
like, it doesn't, if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and as to me, as a believer, seeing the way that God works in the lives of his children, it's not always the same.
Right.
Uh, and so you would think that of all people, we would be the ones who had more grace for that. But sometimes we don't. And um, I see that happening in a lot of church circles. Like, it's like the circle tightens,
Yeah.
right? And so if you run afoul of the circle at all, you end up getting squeezed out. You remember there's this cartoon that's not really a cartoon, whatever, it's a meme, and about the political spectrum, where a bunch of people who used to think of themselves as being on the left have suddenly
Mhm.
found themselves now right of center, even though they've never moved.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like there's something akin to that, maybe, that's happening in some churches. Obviously, not all of them. There are tons of them. There are more denominations than I could ever recount. But it feels like sometimes that circle is tightening so much that a person who fit 5 minutes ago all of a sudden doesn't fit. People can't deal with questions or um, just differences of opinion, or even recognizing that sometimes God has us in different places for a reason.
Yeah.
Uh, and so then it's like, well, now where do I go? Right? It's not that I wanted to leave. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like you
Yeah.
find yourself kind of being pushed out. Again, I don't think that's really that new either. I mean, we don't we don't like questions. We like certainty. But talk about the triumph of the emissary over the master, right?
Yeah.
I mean, man, that book, talk about a life changing book. The McGillichrist,
Yeah.
wow. I mean, reading it, I was just like, this makes so much sense. It explains so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say, so in response to that, like, what would you say is the binding thing? I mean, the term that we throw out here is religio, like the hidden, like
Yes.
related to ligament, the thing that unifies,
Yes.
that you can't even really name. It's not the credo. It's not
Right.
the articulated thing, but
Correct.
it's the thing that brings us all together.
Right.
What do you think that is in the TLC? Do you think it's that we're people that are open to the asking of questions and not seeking certainty? Because I mean, there's a lot of criticism out there, because there would people be. That's one of the big criticisms. This guy MJ, who, like, anytime I post a video, he's always coming on with the criticisms, and he says that TLC is what did he just tell me today? he was saying that it seems like the people that are in TLC are a lot of people that have experienced trauma, and so it's like essentially a group of people that are trauma bonding. And I said, I think it's true that there's a lot of people in TLC with trauma, but I don't think that's merely what it is. Or he'll say things like it's people that prioritize relationship over conflict or contradiction or disagreement. And I'm like, well, I don't even think that's what it is either. Because yeah, we're pretty, I think it's increasingly become, and Paul's been talking about this a lot, which has been like one of the drums I've been beating for forever, is the preeminence of relation underneath everything.
Yeah,
But yet I mean, I just see that as being necessarily fundamental, but that doesn't mean that we can't have meaningful and generative and necessary conflicts and contradictions. Like even all these things that have been coming up in the live streams, problems with Jacob. Like the end of my live stream this morning was Michael Satori and Mark Parker like getting
uh-oh.
heated about things. And I think like that's fine. That's necessary. Like it's almost as if I think if you have a genuine community, that kind of stuff is inevitable.
That's
Like in a
correct.
family, you're just gonna have that stuff, and it's
That's
not. I mean, you don't want to be overwhelmed by that. You don't want to be having conflict constantly. But if you react to conflict appropriately, you learn and grow from it. You know, it's
that's
iron sharpening iron. And so
yes.
I don't know. I'm answering my own question, but what do you think it is that um unifies TLC, and why do you keep showing up? Because
Yeah,
that's the thing to me, is like people keep showing up.
yeah.
Like T
I
Grog will criticize,
mm,
and
yeah.
he's here, but he's here all the time.
Yeah, right. You know, St. Augustine said something about, it was actually something about teaching, but he said that basically when the teacher says something that's true, that the interior light of the student like lights up. This is a really bad paraphrase, but
I'm liking it.
that the light inside kind of comes on and you know the truth has been spoken.
Hmm.
Okay. I think that what attracts me, at least, to this little corner is that, um, well, there are a couple things going on. First, there are times when something true is spoken, right? That there are shared experiences. Um, C.S. Lewis talks about true friendship being, do you see the same truth, right? Um, and of course, we're flawed human beings, and we trip all over ourselves trying to understand and be understood. Um, but even so, I really think that there appears to be, by and large, an openness to hearing other people's stories. And the thing about people sharing their stories is you can't tell somebody your story is wrong, right?
Yeah.
Because, like Paul talks about all the time, propositions are things over which you can argue.
Hmm.
But a, a person coming and laying themselves out before you is not something you can argue about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if there is anything within us that seeks after truth, that wants to find truth, I think that opens us up to hearing other people's stories and not having to fix them, but just simply to kind of experience them with the person who's telling them,
Yeah.
right? And then having that relationship, um, having been relating, right? You're able to hear what people are thinking about without having to turn it into, well, you disagree with me, so I mean,
Yeah.
isn't part of what we're seeing just culturally in our country the fact that people really don't talk to each other anymore? And if they did, even though they don't agree on everything. Um, okay, again, I'm bringing up the high school reunion because it was a really interesting window into something.
Yeah. Yeah.
40 years ago, we didn't all know, down to the detail what everybody thought about every potential political question, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody was friends. It
Yeah.
didn't matter. Um, Now it's like you say one thing, right? And it's like, oh, some, force over here that some group who thinks they have the corner on truth has decided,
Mhm.
no, you can't speak.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we're doing that a lot lately, which suggests to me that there's a whole lot of fear,
Mhm.
right? We don't,
Yeah.
if we're afraid that we're wrong, that would be a reason to get mad about people not sharing our beliefs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So, if yeah, but the openness with which, like the 24-hour stream that happened a few months back,
mhm.
that was epic. I was like, I'm sitting there falling asleep, listening to it, falling asleep, and the stories that people are telling about themselves. I mean, I don't even think people have to experience exactly what you've experienced to hear someone's story and relate to it in parts and say, it's not just me. I'm
Yeah.
not out here on an island going through whatever I'm going through. It's not just me, right?
Yeah.
That's so valuable. We really shouldn't undercut that.
Yeah. I think that's something we've realized, and it's just come up in so many different ways in these conversations is that the personal is the most universal.
It
It's
is.
it's the craziest thing, and it's fantastic. Cause like even having this conversation with you, I have no idea what your politics are. I don't care.
Right.
Like it's just it's a I mean people like I've been around it long enough and talked enough that people might know some of mine, but not really. Like
Yeah.
it came up and I love that about things. Like it came up I saw something on Twitter the other day that was talking about uh that was talking about like signs of a high agency person. It was something I want to just find it because it was fantastic. I thought it was great, but it was something like oh shoot, I thought I had it saved. I'm not gonna be able to find it. But it was something like if you can't really predict if the way that they present themselves is so much different than where they really are. Like the boxer who writes poetry
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. And I think that really is if you can't just easily box someone into something. It's something akin to what Jordan Peterson said. Like if you can it's essentially his idea of ideological possession. Like if you can anticipate what somebody's going to say consistently all the time,
Mm-hmm.
you're not even talking to a person. You're talking to a spirit that's manifesting through a person.
Mm.
So
Mm.
even whether it's politically, whether it's theologically, whether it's if you're just like repeating, this gets into something that I've been hammering lately that Graham Pardun said at that conference, quoting Nikolai Berdyaev. But creativity is the thing that's fundamentally, by its nature, opposed to idolatry. So, like when you're saying something and you're saying it in your own words and you're not just repeating rote phrases, that's that's unique to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not reproducible. It's yours,
Yep.
and it's something that can't be predicted. And that's when you know that you're really, I think, tapped into the true meaning. That's why I say things like the person is the nexus and the locus of all meaning. And that's why we're in the meaning crisis is we've forgotten what a person even is. And I
Yes.
think we're rediscovering that
Mm-hmm.
through these conversations and through talking to each other. And so I'm probably going to need to go in a little bit, but I want to give you the last word. So what do you for you personally,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think is the future of your involvement in TLC, and what do you think the future of it is, and what do you see as uh, hopes, pitfalls, any of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I enjoy so much listening to the live streams, and I would love to participate a little more. Um, I'm always a little nervous about it because honestly, my dogs have been so well behaved tonight. I can't even believe it. But there
Yeah.
are days I cannot get them to shut
Yeah.
up. And
Yeah.
so I'm always nervous if I, wanted to plug into a live stream that they would go absolutely bananas. I mean, they're chihuahuas. That's what they
Yeah.
do. They bark. So there's that. Um, yeah, I trying to find ways to balance the things you need to do with all the like today I swear there were like 7 different streams of things going on. I was like, wait, I want to listen to that. Oh, I want to do this other thing. And I'm like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
um that, as far as I'm concerned, that's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
So, I'm definitely going to be around. I'm going to listen. I'm not the greatest multitasker in the world. So sometimes when I'm listening and then trying to read comments at the same time, my brains kind of scramble. um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I might I might be able to jump on more now and again. And I really hope this thing keeps going. I love what's happening here. I really do. With whatever imperfections it has, that's fine. We are all imperfect, like literally not complete. So why should this?
Every community, everybody, everything in the world isn't perfect. So like you can, I don't know, I have a good friend who says things like that, who says like that there in every group of people, there are always those who want to just point out flaws and like throw, you know, throw a wrench in the wheel or something. And it's just like,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, all that stuff is true, but like if you're just like constantly trying to denigrate something, I mean, that whatever, fine. I mean, we need those people too, I guess. But like, it's a and I don't even want to exclude those people. You know, I'm not trying to get rid of people that point out problems. But like, I think it is something, and we're all a bunch of contrarian people anyhow. But
Yeah,
like there is something if all you ever see is problems with something, and all you're ever doing is pointing out problems, you're fundamentally like Peugeot talks about that. You are somewhat parasitic to whatever is being generative. Like, what are
yeah,
you creating yourself?
right,
What are you doing yourself? You're just like a constant negative Debbie Downer.
right, right. Yeah. I tend to come away from most of these things really encouraged.
Good.
Like just even sometimes when it gets a little testy, uh,
Yeah.
it does seem like people generally are able to kind of put themselves in timeout for a little bit and come back, and
Yeah.
seem to be fine generally. But um, yeah, I would hate to see this go away. I hope it doesn't. Isn't there a plan to do something here in the Midwest sometime
So
soon?
there is. There's going to be next August. I think it's August 22nd through 25th, maybe,
Okay.
is the Midwestuary, which will be a Chicago conference that Sam and Chad and Neil and some other people are starting to plan and put
Okay.
together.
I love
Um,
that.
we will eventually, I don't know when. Minneapolis will eventually figure something out. We'll probably
Okay.
have some kind of a conference. I I mean the oh, what was I just gonna say? Oh, I'm a big fan of slow growth, slow ferment. Everything that I love is slow.
Yeah, for sure.
The slow food movement. They're just very, very little that happens quickly is good.
Oh,
And
listen,
so,
that's me. Are you kidding
yeah,
me? I'm always like, stop this train. I want to get off. It's going too fast.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that is a fine thing with me. I want to ask you this. This will maybe
Okay.
be, unless you have something else, probably my last question for you. But what do you think are ways? Because this is your first. I mean, this is essentially you're like breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah.
Outside of text, you've been in the comments. You're
Yes.
there.
Yes.
Um, what are ways, because this is something that I'm increasingly thinking of is, and it's a passion of mine. It's something that I care a lot about is bringing people in, creating mediums for people to engage, uh, and that's always a difficult thing to navigate. Like you can't, um, I guess you can't create like I don't know how to say it a comfortable or safe space where everyone's gonna do it, but like
Right.
that's something that I've learned. Like I've had a few conversations with people that are unrecorded because
Sure.
that's just something I don't get. Because like I'm very comfortable just going onto a live stream.
Yeah.
I legitimately could go onto a live stream like Joe Rogan level to the entire world.
Yeah.
I would not care. I wouldn't even think about it.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't affect me.
Right.
But that's not true for all people. And
Yeah.
so in order to have um I think a healthy representation of all sorts of people, regardless of temperament and
Sure.
uh what do you have any ideas about that of how to include the biggest array of people?
Huh, that's a great question. Yeah. I, I don't know. I mean, would the nature of it changed? It, would it change if you like tried too hard to get people? I mean, do you know what I'm trying to
Probably.
say here? I
Probably.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I can only speak for myself. Um, yeah, I would love to do more live streaming, but seriously, all it takes is one time with my dogs, and so
Yeah.
I just need to get over that and just be willing to hit the mute button. You know, you know what I mean? Which is fun. Um, yeah, and it may be. Look, I don't know. This is me. Okay, I'm the kid who, when I would go to the pool, I'd have to put my foot in it. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's not too cold, not too
Yeah.
hot, not too okay. And then slowly but surely, like get myself into the pool. That's
Gotta
just me.
feel it out.
Yeah. Now, some people are much more cannonball into the deep end, right? Okay, I get it. So I don't know that there's really anything that you could do that would make that easier. I do think that the more that, and I think this already happens, so it's okay. I think the more that people come on and are just real
Yeah.
and just willing to share what's on their minds, or engage in conversation, and I don't know, don't be too cute by half, right? Everything doesn't. Um,
What was that? Don't be too
don't be too cute by half. Don't be.
I
You
don't know
don't
what
have
that
to be
means.
overly clever for the.
Oh, yeah.
I'm clever. Let me plume my feathers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you know what? Here's the thing, though. Like, you guys have been in this community for quite some time, and you've got a vibe, right? And you got this thing that you do, and it's great. It's obviously attracting people. So I just think maybe some of us are slower to kind of be like, okay, I can ride this wave, right? Um, but yeah, I would hate to see you try to do something deliberate to change it, because that's why it's so great. It just sort of happened, you know?
Yeah. I'm just always thinking of ways to improve and grow and evolve. Like I'm not trying to change it. Like even in
Okay.
live streams, that's something I'm realizing the need for a little bit more structure because my preference is always I'm like you know, I'm ride the waves of chaos. Like whatever comes, like it's fine. I'm not that worried about it. And
Sure.
but I think there's a degree of maturity and I mean I don't even know if it's responsibility, forethought, intentionality, wisdom, planning, like those aren't inherently bad things. And so that's
No,
just an
not at
area
all.
that's just and I know you're not saying that, but that's just an
No.
area that I know that I need to grow in. And so I'm always open to counsel and
Mhm.
seeking that and
I think you guys do a really good job of when somebody new comes into the live stream. I think you do a really good job of trying to invite them to participate and make space for them to do that. So I'd say keep doing what you guys are doing. It's obviously growing, you know?
I mean, I think so. I don't know. I'm really excited for PBK's live stream tomorrow. He's going to be talking about, I don't know if you caught this, but so like in Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein and Heather Hines' conversation was about they mentioned in there the social media aspect of Peterson Academy.
Okay. I haven't
And
listened to that one yet.
yeah, and I mean he's talked about it a few places, but he said one of the things they're trying to do to combat bad actors and trolls and essentially psychopaths is they having a relatively high pay to play thing. And I kind of asked PBK, I think it was in today's live stream, and I was just like, why don't they talk to you about this since you're the one who's done
Seriously.
this?
Yeah.
And I think that's what tomorrow's live stream is about. So I'm excited to hear what's going to be said there tomorrow. So
Nice.
well,
I
anything
have
else?
I'm just grateful that, you know, we did this. This is great. It's really a pleasure getting to talk to you. And yeah, because of course, being on this side of it, like, I feel like I know you guys a little bit, but
Yeah.
you guys don't know me yet because I'm
Yeah.
just back here, you know, lurking in the background. So
It's so fun. I love lurkers. Like when people, that's what people I think don't, I think people are shy, but I love new people.
yeah,
And I love when people come out and want to engage and want to play because that's really what this is to me. I mean, it's mainly, I mean, we're learning a lot.
yeah,
We're growing. I think I'm evolving. I think it's good for me. Otherwise, I mean, if I didn't think this was good for me, then yes, MJ, whatever. I could be deceived. I could be wrong. This could be some like coping mechanism and blindness for deficiency, but I don't think it is.
no,
Um,
well, for God's sake. I mean, would that be the worst thing in the world, even if that were true? I mean, what?
yeah. Well, and I even talked about this morning on the live stream. Even the way that I think about coping mechanisms is Peter Rollins has helped me with this is that you could almost think of them as like as angels that are protecting you for something you're just not ready for yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know, and if you didn't
Completely.
need that, you wouldn't use the coping mechanism. And I think part of it is our perfectionistic, idealistic mentality that's just like I need to be perfect now, but you're not.
Yeah,
And so like a coping mechanism, you're just like, well, I should have known better. Okay, whatever. But you didn't.
that's right.
And so like, is that the worst thing in the world? It's
Yeah,
fine. It's just where you are. It's almost like when Jordan Peterson says, "Treat yourself as somebody that you love and want the best for." Or it's even like your kids. Like you can sit there and browbeat your kids constantly for not doing what they should have done.
yeah.
That doesn't help. That doesn't help anything.
No, it doesn't.
And you can do
Well,
that to yourself too.
yeah. I mean, Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." The implication being that you actually already love yourself, and because you love yourself, you can love your neighbor.
Yeah, and I mean that might be the hardest part of that commandment, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah. I think you're right.
Um,
Absolutely, I think you're right. But
yeah,
isn't that part of what makes this so beautiful? Because isn't being able to share your story and have people actually listen to you and engage and demonstrate that they have some care, doesn't that help you learn how to love yourself? You know, kind of.
I hope so. Lord have mercy. All right,
Right?
let me shut this down, and we'll talk a little bit behind the wall, I guess.
Got it.
Ending recording. Here we go.